Dobar dan, Vaša ekscelencijo, poštovani dekane, prodekani, profesori, sekretari fakulteta, dragi koleginici i kolege. Zadovoljstvo mi je da ime studentskog parlamenta i u svoje lično ime pozdravim našeg cenjenog gosta, ambasadora Sjedinjenih Američkih Država, gospodina Kajla Randolfa-Scotta, koji će govoriti o odnosima Srbije i Sjedinjenih Američkih Država. Čast nam je što ste naš gost i nadam se da će studenti imati priliku da danas čuju nešto novo i značajno za našu profesiju. Sigurna sam da će se naša saradnja uspešno nastaviti, stoga pozivam našeg uvaženog gosta da nam se pridruži na seminaru Snagom znanja u bezbednu budućnost, na kome će se obrađivati aktualne bezbednostne teme, a koji će se održati u martu na Zlatiboru, sa preko 400 učesnika. A sada reč prepuštam našem poštovanom dekanu, profesoru doktoru Ivici Radoviću. Hvala.
Hvala Jelena. Your Excellency Mr. Scott, Ambassador of the United States of America in Serbia, honored audience, respected and dear colleagues, students and teachers. It's my great honor, pleasure and privilege that I can address you as the Dean of the Faculty of Security Study, University of Belgrade. Your Excellency, very welcome, with great gratitude for your coming to our faculty and for the lecture you will hold today on the subject relationship between Serbia and the United States. Before you lecture, in the next few minutes, I would like to introduce some general information about the Faculty of Security Study. The presentation is on English, but as you excellently speak our language, I will continue in the Serbian. Dakle, dobrodošli na Fakultet bezbednosti Univerziteta u Beogradu. Naravno, Fakultet bezbednosti je jedan od 31 fakulteta u okviru Univerziteta u Beogradu, koji predstavlja najstariji i najveći univerzitet u Beogradu, sa oko 100.000 studenta i negde oko 4.000, naravno, nastavnika i saradnika. Naravno, ono što nas čini vrlo ponosnim je da je Univerzitet u Beogradu u odnosu na prestižnu šangajsku listu između 200. i 300. mesta među svim univerzitetima sveta. Fakultet bezbednosti naravno pripada grupi, odnosno matičnoj oblasti društvenih i humanističkih nauka. Naravno, osnovna naša matičnost vezana je za, naravno, nauke bezbednosti. Naravno da te nauke predstavljaju i interdisciplinarne i međudisciplinarne nauke koje uključuju i teorijske, i političke, i pravne, i ekonomske, i etičke, naravno i civilno-vojne aspekte, aspekte civilne zaštite, zaštite životne sredine, naravno ljudskih i socijalnih resursa. Malo je iznenađujuće, vidite da se nalazimo u grupaciji društveno-humanističkih nauka, za svoj početak vežujemo za 1975. kada je fakultet osnovan praktično na fakultetu, prirodno-matematičkom fakultetu, znači fakultetu jedne druge oblasti, ali od tog perioda do danas fakultet je više puta menjao svoje ime da bi od 2006. godine zapravo radi pod ovim imenom. Naravno, ovo je nekadašnja zgrada gde je sve počelo. Ovo je današnji prostor. Činimo sve napore da taj prostor učinimo daleko adekvatnim. Naravno, zahvaljujući razumevanju Vojne akademije, značajan deo i gotovo apsolutan naš nastavni sadržaj realizuje se u prostorijama Vojne akademije. Međutim, fakultet ima i neke vizije i naravno čvrsta obećanja da na prostoru Novog Beograda bi trebalo da se uradi jedan nov, adekvatan objekat. Ovde je naravno idejni projekat urađen od strane Arhitektonskog fakulteta 2011. 2012. godine. Ovo je zaključak Vlade Republike Srbije kojim se daje ovaj prostor za izgradnju fakulteta. Ovo su potvrde urbanističkog projekta i sva adekvatna rešenja koja podrazumevaju. Da li ćemo imati tu ili neki drugi deo prostora u gradu Beogradu, to je sada već nešto o čemu veoma intenzivno govorimo i sa resornim ministrom gospodinom Mladenom Šarčevićem i sa gradonačelnikom Beograda Sinišom Malim. Naravno, pitanje je zašto studirati bezbednost. Potpuno smo svesni da danas i situacije na nacionalnom i regionalnom i globalnom nivou i da ih karakteriše čitav niz bezbednosnih izazova, rizika i pretnji, terorizam, organizovani kriminal, izbegličke krize, vrlo česte i vrlo intenzivne, naravno, prirodne katastrofe sa katastrofalnim posledicama, naravno, problemi u sajber prostoru, radikalne ekstremne ideje i ideologije. Sve su to, naravno, razlozi koji čine interes za naše studije, naravno, onakvim kakav on jeste. Ako imamo čitav niz takvih izazova, gde naći rešenje? Rešenje je, naravno, u snazi znanja. Znači, ako imate znanje, onda možete ići u iskorak ili tražiti odgovore na rešenje, na probleme koje vam se pojavljuju. Naš ukupan nastavni stav čini 75 zaposlenih u odnosu na ovu strukturu, koju naravno ne bi se posebno zadržao. Naravno, posebno nam je drago da u ovom trenutku imamo čitav niz naših studenta kao asistenata, odnosno demonstratora, što naravno i njima i nama daje i jednu vrstu optimizma da na mlađima svet ostaje. Ovo je struktura, na čelu fakulteta sam ja kao dekan, kolega Dragišić je prodekan za razvoj, naravno tu su još kolege Banović kao prodekan za nastavu, kolega Vladimir Cvetković za financije i naravno kolega Šermiljke Svetović za poslediplomske studije. Naravno, predsjednik savjeta fakulteta i naš cenjeni kolega Dimitrij Aleksić koji sedi ovde sa nama kao student prodekan. Naravno, ovo su odelenja ovog fakulteta, odnosno naše katedre. Katedre za bezbednostne studije, u užem smislu, studije odbrane, civilne zaštite i zaštite životne sredine, ljudskih i socijalnih resursa, kriminologija i naravno katedra za društvene i humanističke nauke. Osim toga, na fakultetu funkcioniše i određeni broj istraživačkih centara koji svakako daju jednu vrstu efikasnosti u komunikacijama sa i širom društvenom zajednicom, a naravno i sa subjektima u okviru akademske zajednice. Oni su ovde sada pred nama, ne bi se zadržavao pojedinačno. Evo ovde ja mislim da je sa nama kolega Darko Trifunović kao jedan od centara koji funkcioniše, ne vidim ako se izvinjavam ako još neko od rukovodioca centara ovde. Trenutni broj studenta na fakultetu je negde oko 3000, na akademskim studijama oko 2500, na specijalističkim oko 200 studenta, magistarske studije, doktorske studije. Naravno, u okviru ovih akademskih studija studenti mogu birati određene oblasti, uže oblasti od bezbednosti, ljudskih socijalnih resursa, civilne zaštite i zaštite životne sredine i naravno odbrane. Vrlo smo na neki način tradicionalno vezani za specijalističke studije, naravno u odnosu na bezbednostni menadžment, ali od pre nekoliko godina fakultet zajedno sa Fakultetom za fizičku hemiju realizuje i specijalističke studije u oblasti forenzike. Naravno, na master studijama imamo bezbednosti menadžment, ali od ove godine na fakultetu funkcioniše i master program koji je vezan za upravljanje rizicima u vanrednim situacijama, pre svega elementarnim nepogodama. Naravno, doktorske studije kao kruna, naravno, svake akademske karijere. Ukupan broj onih koji su stekli diplomu na ovom fakultetu počeo od 1975. do danas je negde preko 5.500 i ovde je sada struktura u odnosu na specijalističke, master, doktorske nivoe i sve to. Koliko studenta, interes za upis na studije je veoma visok, svake godine fakultet upisuje 390 studenta, ove godine za 390 mesta ukupan broj kandidata prijavljenih je bio 642. Od tih 390, 150 studenta studira na budžetu, odnosno finansirani što od strane Republike Srbije, a 240 kandidata naravno sami vrše finansiranje svog školovanja. Ovo su regioni Srbije i naravno najveći interes za upis na fakultet je naravno u odnosu na administrativno područje grada Beograda. Vrlo je interesantno da odnos devojaka i dečaka, odnosno osoba ženskog i muškog pola je apsolutno neravnomeran, odnosno praktično 70% naših studenta čine iznenađenje je osobe ženskog pola, odnosno dame, a ne dečaci, odnosno dečnici. Tako da je ovo jedan pokazatelj. Naravno, fakultet u svom obrazovnom ciklusu ima čitav niz institucija sa kojima sarađuje, pre svega u odnosu na praktičnu nastavu naših studenta, ovo je čitav niz institucija. Ne bi se moglo, naravno, govoriti o fakultetu ako nemate odgovarajuću izdavačku delatnost, naravno, udžbeničku literaturu i monografije. To su sve izdanja fakulteta, naravno i naučni časopisi, žurnali. Naravno da osim obrazovanja, istraživački rad se na ovom fakultetu odigrava u okviru čitavog niza projekata. Vrlo smo ponosni, sada je ovde sa nama pomoćnik ministra kolega Tanić, da u ovom trenutku fakultet realizuje 7 projekata koji se finansiraju od strane Ministarstva prosvete, nauke i tehnološkog razvoja, pri čemu je za prvi projekat i nosilac istraživanja. Vrlo smo ponosni što od praktično 2017. godine fakultet je u okviru jednog konzorcijuma uključen u projekat koji se odnosi na menadžment i upravljanje vezanim za probleme poplava u čitavom regionu Dunava. Ovde je nosilac istraživanja Nemačka tehnička agencija za tehničku podršku, zapravo sektor za vanredne situacije u Nemačkoj, ali tu su i u ovom konzorcijumu i institucije iz Austrije, iz Francuske, iz Rumunije, iz Srbije, iz Hrvatske, iz Bugarske, tako da je to jedna reprezentativna ekipa od 15 članica ovog konzorcijuma. Na još jedan projekat smo jako ponosni koji takođe startuje ove godine, a to je projekat u okviru Erasmus, projekta Evropske komisije koji se odnosi upravo na podizanje kapaciteta vezanog za sigurnost i bezbednost u okviru evropskog prostora. Ovo su, naravno, naši partneri i međunarodna komunikacija. Vidite da je tu i univerzitet u Groningenu i čitav niz Marshall centar, Sapienza. Naravno, potpisani ugovori sa nizom fakulteta u našem okruženju i Hrvatska i Crna Gora, ali naravno i vrlo smo ponosni na potpisane sporazume o saradnji sa Šangajskom akademijom društvenih nauka i evo sad nekih poslednjih događaja koji su prepoznatljivi. Ovo je pre godinu dana i na kraju vašeg predavanja moj će biti zadovoljstvo da vam uručim jednu ovu publikaciju koja zapravo prepoznaje izazove političke i bezbednosne na prostoru Balkana u odnosu na jedan pojas, jedan put. Sjajna konferencija o humanoj bezbednosti 2016. novembra u rektoratu univerziteta, naravno publikacija sa te konferencije, naš odlazak u Šangaj i poseta univerzitetu Fudan, tu smo kolega Dragišić, kolega Božović, specijalni savjetnik predsjednika Vučića i kolega Trifunović. Ovo je ponovo jedna sjajna konferencija sa Arhitektonskim fakultetom, urbana sigurnost i urbani razvoj. Ovo je Balkanska konferencija u Ohridu, skoro održana u septembru, vezana je ponovo za balkanski prostor. Ovo je ponovljena druga konferencija 23. novembar u klubu poslanika, ponovo je to su bezbednosni izazovi i rizici na novom putu svile, a ovo smo kao završetak mi kod vas, vi ste sada kod nas, ovo smo mi sa studentima u prostorijama ambasade Sjedinjenih Američkih Država. Ovo je naše zadovoljstvo da je Congressman Ted Paul 9. oktobra u svečanoj sali rektorata Univerzitetu u Beogradu imaju predavanje našim studentima. Ja ću završiti ovom porukom da čitav niz bezbednosnih izazova, rizika i pretnje je pred nama, a da snaga znanja je zapravo odgovor na te izazove i pretnje, a onda ću se poslužiti još nečim. Ovo je moj sertifikat iz Nacionalnog instituta i na engleskom ću pročitati reči Jamesa Smithsona koji daju zapravo istu poruku, a one glase: For the increase and diffusion of knowledge among men. Cenjeni gospodine Scott, vi ste ovdje danas da širite i da razmenjujemo znanja među ljudima sveta. Čini mi zadovoljstvo i privilegiju da biti ovdje.
Hvala dr. Radović i hvala vama na poziv. Budem tu s vama. Prema našem dogovoru, mi smo već rekli da s obzirom da svi vi trebate da učite engleski u ovom fakultetu, znači ja govorite na engleskom, ali ja sam htio da počnem samo na srpskom na kratko, samo da vi znate kad dolazi do perioda pitanje ili u stvari ja bih htio više razgovora, da možete slobodno isto da obratite na srpskom. Thank you very much for that introduction and for putting the pressure on me by bringing in such great names as James Smithson and others. But this is a great opportunity for me. I want to congratulate you all for choosing this field of study. Because as you said in your introduction, I think that the field of security is expanding, unfortunately, and the security threats that are facing are expanding. A generation ago, 2 generations ago, people would have focused mainly on direct military threats, and partially perhaps on things like weapons of mass destruction. But increasingly, the field of security encompasses also economic security, environmental security, and the range of physical security threats have also unfortunately expanded. So all of those have to be taken into account. As you went through the pictures there, I couldn't help but notice the Chinese One Road, One Belt project, but mainly that Foreign Minister Ivica Dačić was sitting there at that conference. And actually, I wanted to start my talk to you today by referring to the Honorable Foreign Minister of Serbia, because he met last week on the margins of the conference of the OSCE, OSCE, for those who know the Serbian acronym, in Vienna, with Secretary Tillerson, U.S. Secretary of State. And while the meeting was not a formal meeting, it was a meeting on the margins of it, Foreign Minister Dačić reported out to the Serbian press what he had said in that meeting. And I'll start by that. He said, this is Foreign Minister Dačić, I pointed out to Secretary Tillerson that changes in U.S. policy should be made by the President, the Vice President, and the Foreign Minister, since the representatives of the old establishment could not do it because they were defending their policy from the 1990s. I'm sure that Secretary Tillerson took that advice with the all due attention that it deserved, and I'm sure he was grateful for any advice he got. And so I'm not sure what I do in this case, standing up here, because I would fit in that category of those who represent the old establishment. But in fact, I have stood before microphones such as this representing U.S. policy through 7 different presidents now. And no one's ever questioned the ability of our career civil service and diplomatic service to represent and support the policies of whatever president and whatever indication they get. But what I understood from his advice to Secretary Tillerson was the hope here in Serbia that we would see, with this new administration, with the decision-making they make, a change in American policy towards the Balkans and towards Serbia in particular. And I can only say that at this time, as a representative of the United States, I think that those hopes may be somewhat misplaced. Because, and I'm sure that you've learned this also in your studies, countries' foreign policies, their strategic outlook, don't really change from one leader to another, or from one administration to another, because a country's policies are determined by a country's interests. And those interests don't change because the voters have decided on a different leader. Only if some sort of strategic outlook for the country is a focus of the electoral campaign, is it likely that you would see a new leader coming in saying, I'm going to change things. But I have to say that in our electoral campaign, which is very hard fought, which resulted in the election of Donald Trump, I don't recall either candidate at any time discussing the Balkan region or Serbia in particular. It was not an issue in the campaign. And so it would be somewhat unrealistic to expect that it would lead to a change in U.S. policy. A change in personalities at the top, without a doubt. And Donald Trump is a unique president in my history, a unique character in American politics in my lifetime. But he did not articulate any massive changes in our policy towards this part of the world. So yes, I am a representative of the old establishment in that sense. Yes, I do articulate a policy that was the policy of the United States in the 1990s, but it was actually the policy of the United States in the late 1980s as well. Because U.S. policy towards Europe as a whole and towards this region has been pretty much unchanged since the fall of the Berlin Wall. It has been based upon, if you want to put it in a bumper sticker, we call it a Europe whole, free, and at peace. Whole meaning a Europe without borders, a Europe in which countries are integrated into a Euro-Atlantic, if they choose, or European structure, which is holistic. A Europe that's free, a Europe that is dominated by democratically elected governments and the rule of law, and a Europe that is at peace, that is, in which conflicts among the nations are kept to a minimum or hopefully eliminated entirely. That has been the basis of American policy ever since the fall of the Berlin Wall. It dominated our policy in the 1990s. It dominated our policy in the first decade of the 21st century, and it continues to be American policy in 2017. And it has been articulated again by this new administration as well, including by Secretary Tillerson and Vice President Pence and President Trump in their travels in Europe. So this focus on a Europe whole, free, and at peace hasn't changed. So what does that mean for the Balkans? That means that our policy has been dominated by efforts to see a consolidation of the democratic transitions with the end of the former Yugoslavia and the move to new and independent states, of domestic reforms based upon both democratic but also economic and social reforms, of regional reconciliation. This is the Europe at peace, because in fact Yugoslavia and the breakup of Yugoslavia was a very bitter wake-up call for everyone in Europe, but also for the United States, on how difficult it is to see this transition go forward peacefully. And I think that the legacy of the 1990s and the brutal fighting that took place in the former Yugoslavia still remains a scar on everybody's memory, and something that still has to be dealt with. And I can say, as an American diplomat who was here in 1981, 2, and 3, that even then, just less than a decade before fighting broke out here, I never could have imagined the brutality, the viciousness with which the former Yugoslavia would have fallen apart, and how neighbors would turn on neighbors, and ethnic groups against ethnic groups. It seemed to be inconceivable at the time. And I think it seemed to most people in Europe inconceivable that that sort of brutality would take place in Europe today. But the lesson of the 1990s remains, I think, a legacy for all of us, and something that we have to keep dealing with. We also seek to focus on paving the way for European integration for all countries of this region, and Euro-Atlantic countries for any country which wishes to take that path. So, once again, if I can explain in short order, U.S. policy towards the Balkan region, it is the EU path for all, and the NATO path for anyone who wants it. If I look at that from the perspective of Serbia, taking a look around your own borders, and where you see the security situation and also the challenges you face, I think the key issue still remains Kosovo and where Kosovo is going. That, if I can say, I said our policy has been pretty much unchanged in the Balkan region. That's the only thing that I can recall in the last 25 years where there has been a change. With the failure of the UN's efforts to resolve the status of Kosovo after the 1999 war, the declaration of Kosovo's independence, which has been supported by my country, but also by over 100 other countries of the world, is the one major strategic change in U.S. foreign policy in the region. Everything else has remained pretty consistent. But with regard to Kosovo, for Serbia, we seek a comprehensive normalization of relations between Pristina and Belgrade. We hope that the dialogue sponsored by the European Union and led by the European Union can lead to exactly that. And I have to say that's not just our hope. It's also the commitment of the leaders of the Kosovo government, but also the leaders of the Serbian government. They have all committed to this process and to the idea of a comprehensive normalization of relations. Now, what that means is still left a lot open, and that's up to the negotiations and the discussions. And we're far from reaching that, from my point of view. But that is our goal. We also are optimistic that the internal dialogue launched here in Serbia a few months back by President Vučić will lead to some progress in that process as well. I must admit honestly that I haven't seen that progress yet, and I haven't even seen that this internal dialogue is leading to a very robust discussion of options in this country. But nonetheless, we can remain hopeful and see where it leads to. And I know that President Vučić, because we've talked about this on a couple of occasions, is comfortable with where the dialogue is now and hopeful that it will continue to yield more ideas that will lead to some progress in the future. So that's regarding Kosovo. If you look straight west from here, you have the country of Bosnia. Bosnia is a very difficult case for security in this region. The Dayton Accords put an end to the fighting in Bosnia and created a structure which allowed the fighting to come to an end. It, however, created a very fragile structure which has proven to be pretty much incapable of managing change and managing forward movement by Bosnia. And right now we have Bosnia, which many would describe as a failed state in the heart of Europe, or certainly a very fragile state in the heart of Europe. So our goal is to continue to support the unity of Bosnia and Herzegovina to prevent its slide back into ethnic division and conflict, but also to try to encourage all sides to move forward towards building a stronger, more stable, more durable Bosnia for the future, so that it too can get strongly on the path towards European Union integration, because right now it is nowhere close. If we look from the security perspective at many of Serbia's other neighbors, we see that Serbia is increasingly surrounded by countries which have chosen Euro-Atlantic integration. That is, they have joined the European Union when they could, and have also chosen to join NATO. In most cases, they joined NATO before they joined the European Union. That may lead to some to draw a lesson and a conclusion that it is easier for the European Union to absorb a country which has already gone through the transitions necessary to join NATO, but it's not exclusive. Countries don't have to be a NATO member to join the European Union, and there are plenty of good examples of European Union countries who joined who were not NATO countries. But Serbia now is surrounded by Croatia, by Albania, Montenegro, Slovenia, Hungary, Romania, and Bulgaria, all of them NATO allies. And that has an implication for Serbia's own calculation of its security and the security risks it faces, and also the approaches it takes to respond to those security risks. We have, turning towards Montenegro in particular, a country which is just as far along, if not in fact further, in its EU aspirations. It has opened more chapters than Serbia has. It has closed more chapters than Serbia has. It has recently joined NATO as well. But I think that all of us agree with what President Juncker said recently, and has been repeated by many other analysts of the region, that Montenegro and Serbia are right now the two countries which are closest to joining the European Union and the most likely countries to make it by 2025 if they can continue on the reform path. And we want to do everything that we can to help support both of these countries move in that direction and continue to move forward. If you look to the south, to Macedonia, we have a very peculiar case. Macedonia, I think, could quickly catch up to Montenegro and to Serbia on the EU path. And Montenegro is pretty much ready right now to join NATO if it weren't that one NATO country won't allow it. So it really comes down in both the European Union and in NATO to resolving the name issue regarding Macedonia. That's a long-term dispute between Greece and Macedonia. It needs to be resolved. It needs to be overcome. The special UN negotiator for this issue, Admiral Nimitz, said recently that he is very hopeful and optimistic that it could be resolved in the next year. We certainly hope so as well, and I think that if that were to happen, we would see Macedonia quickly catching up on the EU path to be right there at the same level with Serbia and Montenegro. And in fact, on NATO, I think that they would very quickly become a NATO member because their integration through the Partnership for Peace is already quite well advanced. So, having looked around your neighborhood, now let's take a look at Serbia and Serbia-US relations for just a very short moment. When I'm asked to say how I describe US-Serbian relations, I'm of course a diplomat, so I have to speak diplomatically, but I say it's about a partnership. And we do have a broad partnership with Serbia. We have an economic partnership. American companies who are very active here in Serbia have over $4 billion in US investment in this country. And there are 17,000 people here in Serbia who work directly for American companies. If I can say even more, expand that a little bit more, the American Chamber of Commerce, which includes American companies, but also other international companies and some domestic companies who share similar ideas about the need for economic reforms and pro-business environment here in Serbia, include over 200 companies with over 100,000 employees here in Serbia. And in fact, the members of the American Chamber of Commerce contribute 65% of all the VAT taxes that are paid in this country and 75% of all the excise taxes. So they're a major force for the budget of Serbia. They're a major force for employment in Serbia. And they benefit when your business enabling environment is positive and welcoming of investment. And that's one of the key issues that we work on together. And in the end, every Serbian citizen benefits. 100,000 people with jobs who might not have them otherwise is not something to diminish in a country where unemployment is one of the leading problems and continues to be one of the leading concerns of people throughout this country. We're also partners in assistance. It surprises people in Serbia if you look at polls here in Serbia and ask people in Serbia who gives the most help to Serbia. The polls are pretty consistent that most Serbs believe that Russia gives the most help to Serbia. that many believe that the European Union is in second, and they don't even put the United States in the top 10. The reality is that the European Union is by far the largest assistance donor and provides the greatest amount of assistance by far, but the United States is the second largest donor here in Serbia. The Russians don't even make the top 10 in the reality of their assistance. Political assistance may be a different thing, but as far as actual economic assistance, they don't do very much. We've provided, since the fall of Slobodan Milosevic, almost $1 billion in economic assistance to Serbia. Some of that has been in traditional development projects, building schools, building hospitals, providing support for clinics and equipment for clinics. Part of it's been in supporting legal reforms here in Serbia, helping to write new laws. For instance, Serbia jumped from somewhere like number 90 in the world to number 10 in the world on the ease with which you get a construction permit for doing business. That was due much in part to USAID support for the rewriting of the law here in Serbia to allow electronic permitting. We do a lot of support for rule of law programs. Most of your first level courts, your basic criminal courts, have been renovated by the United States. The computer systems they use now to interconnect them, the training manuals that their judges use were all provided through assistance by the United States and the United States Agency for International Development. We provide prosecutor training so that they can be more effective in their investigations and case management. We support your anti-corruption agency to make its work more professional. We provided assistance, not directly to businesses because we don't do that, but what we call through business enabling, providing marketing assistance to clusters of industries so that they can better market their products for export. I think you all know that in small countries such as Serbia, it's really the export market which is the basis of whether you will be prosperous or not. And Serbian companies, especially smaller companies, need help to understand how to market their goods overseas, to go off to trade fairs, to work on their websites so that they can reach customers far away from the local area. We do a lot of law enforcement training, legal training, and support for civil society, whether it be support for Serbia in managing the refugee and migrant flow. The United States is the largest donor to the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, which is the single largest supporter for migrant work here in Serbia. We do work on political literacy for citizens. We do work supporting philanthropy and a legal environment which will allow companies and individuals to give more to charitable organizations. On corporate responsibility, American companies are very active in providing support also for charity work, and then assistance to disabled people. And I like to pause here for a second because from time to time, in fact, quite frequently, I see in Serbian tabloids that this is in fact support to help overthrow the government of Serbia. I can assure you that we do not support overthrowing any governments in this region. In fact, if I go back to our basic views on our interests here in this region, stability in this region is pretty high up on them, and we're not looking for instability in the region. We provide support to building democratic institutions. We don't provide support to any particular political parties. In fact, we provide support to all political parties. Through our assistance programs, we have trained the spokesmen of the SDS, but also the SPS and DS, and any number of S's out there. We provide organizational support. We provide website and social media support, not to prepare their messages for them, but to help them understand how to prepare messages and how to get them out, to help strengthen, in fact, the democratic system as a whole. We are also partners in building peace and stability. This is a security faculty. Maybe I could just talk about that for a few moments. We see Serbia as a linchpin of this region and even an anchor of stability. We've seen that where Serbia goes can have such an impact not only on Serbia but also on many of the other countries in the region. We see Serbia as a key to resolving conflicts in this region and Serbia as a key to reconciliation among the countries of this region. So that is a key component of kind of our focus on Serbia. We would like to see a continuing commitment by all of the countries of this region, led by Serbia, in resolving some of the legacy issues that remain after the breakup of Yugoslavia. And we see how difficult that is. Border demarcation. You still don't have border agreements with most of your neighbors in Serbia. Resolving the issues dealing with refugees from the 1990s. There are still people who don't have permanent homes, who fled their homes in the early 1990s. Resolving the questions of pensions, of people who worked in one country but now live in another. All of these issues need to be resolved, and it's Serbia which will play a major role in all of them. We do a lot of peacekeeping training for Serbian forces. You know that the Serbian military, per capita, provides more people for peacekeeping operations in the world under either the UN flag or the European Union flag. And as a partnership for peace, there's not excluding the possibility they can do it under the NATO flag. But Serbia provides more troops per capita than any other country in this region. And we see it in our interest to make sure that those troops are trained, professional, and interoperable in peacekeeping operations. And the NATO standard, even if Serbia doesn't choose to join a NATO operation, the NATO standard is also the EU standard, is also the UN standard. So we've worked very closely with Serbia on that. We've provided a lot of assistance to South Base down near Preševo, which is Serbia's permanent peacekeeping training facility. Much of the infrastructure there was provided through support from the United States military. We provide a lot of help to your border and customs services. We provide special equipment to detect weapons of mass destruction. We do a lot of contributions to demining operations here in Serbia, and not just related to mines that are left over from the 1999 bombing, but in fact many of the mines, I was just last week down near Preševo, these were mines placed by Albanian citizens of Serbia on Serbian territory during the uprising in 2002 in the Preševo Valley. We're helping to pay to remove those. We're helping to train your own soldiers to remove munitions from Serbian military bases, some of which actually remain from World War II. Many of which are your own weaponry, your own munitions, which have become old or sitting in warehouses and are a danger in and of themselves. So we have a whole range of programs on weapons reduction and weapons, what's the word, John? For
removal and abatements.
Thank you, removal and abatements. You guys can look that up later. That means getting rid of it or making it safe. We are partners in counterterrorism operations. As you all know, there's a growing concern that as the coalition to defeat ISIS has made significant progress in the last few months in pushing ISIS back, removing any toehold that they had in either Iraq or Syria, that many of these people, especially those who are foreign fighters who have joined the ISIS cause, are returning home. And that's a significant threat, and we work with Serbia through intelligence sharing, through border controls, and other things to make sure that anybody who would be coming back to this region are monitored and to make sure that they don't become a threat here at home. And then we also do, through our Department of Defense, and this may surprise a lot of people, a significant amount of what they call humanitarian assistance. So if you go to the Military Medical Academy here in Serbia, you will find very sophisticated medical equipment, all of which was a contribution by the United States. You will find homes for battered women, which were built by the United States military here in Serbia. In fact, I expect in the next couple of weeks to go down to Smederevo to dedicate yet another one of these buildings. You will find hospital wings, or actually I should say Dom Zdravlje wings in some of the smaller towns in the south who couldn't afford modernization, which were paid for by the United States Army Corps of Engineers and built with American military money. So these are all things that we consider part of our partnership here in Serbia. I'm going on too long, so let me just go quickly again. As we look at Serbia, we see it as a linchpin of the region. It plays a crucial role, but we also have to admit it, we see and we worry that Serbia also could play the role as a spoiler, as a troublemaker with any number of the countries in the region. So it's all about working to ensure that that doesn't happen one way or the other. We think that President Vučić has shown good statesmanship in fulfilling that role as a peacemaker, as a reconciler, but we would like to see more. I worry about current trends, especially we see increasingly the rehabilitation of so-called war heroes, who many of them we would call, in fact, war criminals here in this region. We'd like to see Serbia continue to pursue economic and judicial reforms so that we can move faster to get into the European Union. I'm sure that you're all aware that in the last couple of days, Serbia has opened 2 more chapters. Serbia thought it should have opened 5 more chapters. Almost everyone in the European agrees that you were ready to open 3 more chapters, but you only opened 2, and the reason was that the European Union and certain members of the European Union were not satisfied with the progress that's being made, especially on the rule of law here in Serbia, and they chose not to, I think, to send a signal. We'd like to see more progress made in normalization of relations with Kosovo. We would like to see your country have more regular and more positive communications with Croatia to the west. We want you to see you playing a positive role in encouraging stability in Bosnia and Herzegovina and helping all of the entities in Bosnia and Herzegovina uphold the Dayton Accords. And we'd like to see you to continue to strengthen your partnership with NATO in any way that you choose to. And finally, I will say, because I have to repeat it seems like all the time, but I will do so again, we believe that Serbia can have good and positive relationship with the West and with the East. No one, certainly not in Washington, is requesting that Serbia make a choice between Russia and Brussels or Russia and Washington. But we do want to see Serbia uphold the values which it says it is committed to. If its strategic objective is to join the European Union, we would like to see progress seen in Serbia looking more and more like a vibrant, democratic European Union country, and also see it making progress eventually towards what it must do to join the European Union, which is to harmonize Serbia's foreign policy with that of the European Union's common foreign and security policy. And with that, I'm going to end talking to you, and instead prefer to have a conversation and react to the things which interest you as students of security studies here in Serbia, and see whatever I can do to reflect on American policy and how it fits in your interests. So, thank you very much.
Zahvaljujem cenjenoj ekscelenciji. Sada će kolega Dragišić nastaviti aktivno da kao moderator vodi dalje deo ovog druženja. Profesore Dragišić, izvolite.
Zahvaljujem se, posebno se zahvaljujem vama, ekscelencijo, na veoma otvorenim rečima koje ste uputili našim studentima. Sada je prilika da razgovaramo sa ambasadorom. Vi možete postaviti pitanje na srpskom jeziku, kao što čujem ambasador veoma dobro razume, veoma dobro govori naš jezik, a očigledno veoma dobro razume našu zemlju. Samo bih vam napomenuo da Srbiju i Sjedinjene Američke Države vezuju vekovi prijateljstva i samo par godina neprijateljstva. Da smo u najtežim trenucima po naš narod i našu državu bili na istoj strani istorijskoj sa Sjedinjenim Američkim Državama i kada god smo u istoriji bili na istoj strani sa Sjedinjenim Državama, tada smo napredovali, tada smo prosperili prosperitet. Druga stvar koju treba imati na umu, to je da su Sjedinjene Američke Države druga srpska država. Dakle, da posle Srbije najveći broj Srba živi u Sjedinjenim Američkim Državama. Da se smatra da je Čikago drugi srpski grad po veličini. Da iza Beograda najveći broj Srba živi u Čikagu. Dva Srbina na koja smo najviše ponosni, Nikola Tesla i Mihajlo Pupin, su takođe bili i Amerikanci. Tako da su veze između dve države i veze između dva naroda mnogo, mnogo dublje i mnogo jače nego što na prvi pogled izgleda. Mnogi danas više stotina srpskih studenta studira u Sjedinjenim Američkim Državama. Naša ekonomija je, kao što ste čuli od ambasadora Skata, veoma vezana u Sjedinjene Američke Države i nadamo se još većem razvoju. I nadamo se naravno razvoju i odnosa kada je akademska saradnja u pitanju. Pre neki dan smo dekan i ja u Američkoj ambasadi razgovarali sa predstavnicima Ohaja, nacionalne garde Ohaja. Dogovorili smo se oko unapređivanja saradnje između naših fakulteta i sličnih akademskih institucija u Sjedinjenim Američkim Državama. Tako da naši odnosi idu uzlaznom linijom i to je ono što sve može da nas radi. Izvolite, postavljajte pitanja, dajte komentare, nemojte se ustručavati.
Dobar dan, imam jedno pitanje, a to je šta mislite...
Predstavite se.
Radoš Darić, član studentskog parlamenta Fakultetu bezbednosti. Šta mislite, kakve su šanse da srpski studenti preko alumni projekata razmena studenta odu u Ameriku? Hvala.
American universities accept literally tens of thousands of foreign students every year.
We have a number of exchange programs between universities, and it all depends upon the nature of that exchange and how it's done. In most cases, I don't believe that these agreements include essentially that America picks up the cost of the students in the States. In fact, the universities in America pay for the cost of their students that they send elsewhere, and we expect the same from those. So the exchange program and the possibility for it really depends more upon the financial abilities of the university or the student and working out the exchange program itself. But there are a large number of exchange programs. Increasingly, American universities, in looking at exchange programs in Europe, are looking beyond London and Paris and Rome and Florence. Although among those 4 cities, I probably picked up about 50% of all American exchange students in Europe. But increasingly, they're looking for opportunities where their students can be given a broader framework for study. And that's why I think a place like Belgrade as a regional hub for a hugely important part of Europe offers the opportunity. So it's a matter of working on your exchange agreements with universities, and then American universities are always happy to have foreign students because it provides diversity of views to the American student population as well. It may be a surprise to you, but over 1/2 of the people in my country do not even own a passport. Many students, even at the university level, well-educated, dynamic, have never traveled abroad in their life. And the only exposure they get to other countries and other cultures is through immigrants who come to the United States or at the university level, where we have rather robust exchange programs. And also our universities encourage their students to engage in exchanges, so that most American universities that I'm aware of try to provide for at least 1 semester abroad for their students. And they work out deals with many universities exactly to be able to arrange that. So I think there are great opportunities. There's a lot of things which would attract students to be coming here to Serbia. I think Serbia has a very dynamic, especially here in Belgrade, a very dynamic nightlife that is part of the attraction. It's centrally located for travel elsewhere. You know, with a little bit of work, you can do better than leading the universities, which right now have a lot of summer programs in Dubrovnik. But I think there are reasons where a full semester here in Belgrade would be a great use to students. Thank you.
Sljedeće pitanje.
Da, strana izlaze sa Fakulteta bezbednosti, student druge godine i predstavnik.
Student druge godine i predstavnik studentskog parlamenta. Moje pitanje je koji su aktivnosti u okviru saradnje Vojske Srbije i Nacionalne garde Ohaja, i drugo pitanje da ukratko prokomentarišete priznanje Jerusalima kao glavnog grada Izraela. Hvala.
Thank you very much. Those are both great questions and quite different questions. So let's talk first about the Ohio National Guard, and I want to put it in a bigger perspective. Because it may seem strange to you, why is the Ohio National Guard in partnership with Serbia? And besides the fact that Cleveland as a city has a lot of Serbian Americans, the reality is that we have these National Guard partnership programs with a large number of countries in the world. Our National Guards are not simply weekend warriors, people who go out every once in a while to dress up in a uniform. They are in fact very effective military units, and they encompass people who also work and live in the civilian sector, who bring special skills into our military, so that in times of conflict, the President can call on both the National Guards but also the Army Reserves to bring in special skills. And so too is it with the partnership here in Serbia with the Ohio National Guard. And the Ohio National Guard is actually partners also with Hungary, if I'm not mistaken. So they know this part of the world pretty well. The Ohio National Guard's programs are tailored to what Serbia wants and needs. If Serbia comes to us and say they'd like to work with another professional force on infantry maneuvering, the Ohio National Guard can provide it. If they want work, as they have recently, on counterterrorism operations, the Ohio National Guard has specialists who can work in that area. If they want, we've done a few years ago, quite a few years ago, a parachute jump with the Ohio National Guard. They have the capabilities. They have either their own planes or the ability to use the planes of the U.S. military, and highly trained people. So the work that they're doing down mainly in South Base has been based upon peacekeeping trainings, planning for emergency operations, the same sort of thing that you would think that your own military would be training for as their likely eventual needs. They've also done a lot of work with your military medical academy, using doctors from the Ohio National Guard, and in fact I should mention right now there are members of the Ohio National Guard deployed together with members of the Serbian military in Angola. And they'll be coming back in a couple of weeks, but they've been down there doing essentially work with the Angolan military on trying to improve their capabilities. But Serbia's military doctors are in fact one of the great strengths of the Serbian military, and they've done a lot of work there because I noted that Serbia hits above its weight limit in peacekeeping operations. But I will also say that Serbia chooses specialty areas where it's unlikely that Serbian soldiers are going to be shot at. And your military doctors are one of the best things, and when you look at peacekeeping operations, it's frequently a shortage element, providing medical support for peacekeeping operations. So we've been happy to work with Serbia to develop that capability so that Serbian doctors who are already well-trained doctors, but are also able to deploy overseas on short notice with their equipment and to work. So we've also worked with them on the creation of a Balkan medical task force, essentially bringing together Serbian military doctors with Macedonian military doctors, Montenegrin military doctors, Slovenian military doctors, and Albanians, I believe, to create a larger group medical unit which know how to operate together, who use the same sort of equipment, who can communicate together, and who can deploy together in the case of a need to a military operation overseas. So that's the sort of things that we're doing with the Ohio National Guard. Now, with regard to your second question, Jerusalem, I can say honestly, as a representative of the 1990s establishment network, every American ambassador who is still alive today to Israel recently wrote a letter encouraging the president not to recognize Jerusalem and move the U.S. embassy to Jerusalem. They felt it would be destabilizing. The president, however, was very clear in his statement and his speech, which was that people have been saying that for decades, that even though the American public and the American Congress has repeatedly instructed the executive branch to move our embassy to Jerusalem and to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, the argument has always been, we don't want to do that because that would harm the peace process. President Trump, in announcing that he had decided to change that policy, to back up a promise he made during the presidential campaign that he would do this, said, for 20 years, people have been arguing that it will harm the peace process, but the peace process is going nowhere. Let's stand up with our friends and our allies, the Israelis, and recognize what's the reality, that Jerusalem is the capital of Israel. And I can say this from personal experience. I served in our embassy in Tel Aviv for 3 years. My job at the time, I was a relatively junior diplomat, was to follow Israeli domestic politics and report back on it, because their domestic politics have a huge impact on their foreign and security posture. So I was what we would call the Knesset watcher. My job was to watch what was going on in the Israeli parliament and report back on the relationships between parties and upcoming elections and so forth. I traveled 3 times a week from Tel Aviv up to Jerusalem because the parliament is in Jerusalem and the Prime Minister's office is in Jerusalem and the foreign ministry is in Jerusalem. As a matter of fact, the only major ministry in the entire Israeli government that's not in Jerusalem is the Defense Ministry, which is in Tel Aviv. So the President was simply recognizing a reality. And you'll note that when he announced it, he also said that he had instructed the State Department to begin the process of moving our embassy to Jerusalem. He didn't say where in Jerusalem, and he didn't say how long that was going to take. And I know that even in the best of circumstances, to move an embassy, to build a new embassy, and anyone who's passed by our embassy, the new embassy we have here in Belgrade, will know that they're pretty much built like a fortress. To build that takes a lot of time. First you have to find the land, you have to design the structure, you've got to then build it. So we're talking probably several years before the United States Embassy will move to Jerusalem. And he also didn't, in his statement, say that we recognize all of Jerusalem as the Israeli capital, still leaving room for the Palestinian point of view that East Jerusalem should be their capital. And his hope is that through the negotiations on a peace settlement, that we will actually move forward to have an agreement. But in the meantime, he has made the decision, a decision, I repeat again, that has been demanded by our legislature repeatedly, including only 6 months ago in a vote in our Senate that was 99 in favor and only 1 person absent, to move the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem and to recognize Jerusalem as the Israeli capital. And in a democratic system, to my mind, that bears a lot of weight. And I will also say that President Trump made a promise in the electoral campaign that he would do this. And so he's simply following through on a promise he made. There have been previous presidential candidates who have made this very same promise and then chosen not to when they became president. But Donald Trump has decided to be true to his word. And it reflects, once again, as I said, this unique character of Donald J. Trump, a president who's unlike any other that I have seen in my lifetime. Thank you for the question.
Izvolite, kolega.
Ja sam Miloš Tombić iz Studentskog fakulteta. Što na glasu tako dobro? Ja bih se vratio na srpsko-američke odnose, odnosno srpsko-američki odnosi su imali dugu istoriju, kao što je profesor rekao. Tu je bilo uspona i padova. Najveći pad je bio 1999. godine kada je vaša zemlja bombardovala našu zemlju 78 dana i bacila nekoliko tona uranijuma na nas. Tu ima dosta problema takođe u okupaciji našeg dela teritorije. Republika Srbija izvršena je i vojna i vazdušna agresija na Republiku Srbiju i pokušan je da se odvoji nasilno deo naše teritorije. To i dalje, to je jako veliki problem u našim odnosima. Iako naša vlast pokušava da balansira između istoka i zapada, to na dužu perspektivu jeste dobro, ali teško je za održavanje. Druga stvar, problemi, slučaj braće Bitići, koji je u našim odnosima takođe problematičan. Vaša zemlja traži da se taj slučaj istraži. Mi isto tako tražimo da se 2500 nestalih Srba rasvetli slučaj. Druga stvar, pominjali ste i koliko vaša zemlja pomaže našoj zemlji. To je istina i hvala vam u tome. Takođe niste pomenuli da je veliki deo tog novca koji dolazi u Srbiju, finansiraju se nevladine organizacije koji nisu tako prijateljski nastrojeni Srbiji i srpskim interesima. Interes Republike Srbije, bar kako se proklamuje u govoru svih političkih zvaničnika, jeste da je Kosovo sastavni deo Republike Srbije. Ja sam lično sa Kosova i Metohije i ja smatram da je Kosovo sastavni deo Republike Srbije, kao nadam se i većina ovde prisutna. Pominjali ste i o bezbednosti situaciji na Balkanu. Republika Srbija je okružena zemljama koje su duboko kriminalizovane, od Hrvatske, preko Bosne, preko Crne Gore, privremene institucije u Kosovo i Metohiji, znači trenutno su svi pripadnici, nekadašnji pripadnici OVK, terorističke organizacije. Takođe u Makedoniji, jako se zategnuta situacija, zemlja je u dubokoj krizi, prisustvo organizovanog kriminala je dostiglo vrhunac, tako da situacija jeste jako teška i mi se nadamo da će doći do nekog poboljšanja. Ja bih samo citirao našeg znamenitog mislioca Stovana Novakovića, koji je rekao da se Srbija treba prikloniti onime od koga će imati najmanje štete. Moje pitanje glasi koja je razlika između Katalonije i Kosova i koja je razlika između Krima i Kosova u percepciji Amerike, odnosno u vođenju te agresivne spoljne američke politike. I još bih samo se nadovezao da u autorskom članku Saveta Pentagona gospodin Freeman je rekao da se američka spoljna politika zasniva na dva instrumenta. Prvi instrument to je američka prinuda, odnosno pretnja prinudom, i drugi instrument to su sankcije. Ova zemlja je iskusila oba instrumenta te vaše politike. Nadam se da će doći do poboljšanja. Ovo je i sam predsjednik Trump je napominjao da treba doći do poboljšanja i to je jedini američki predsjednik koji je ispunio svoje obećanja, odnosno rekao je da će izgraditi zid prema Meksiku, to je počeo da radi, priznao Jerusalim, mnoge svoje poteze koje je obećao u svojoj kampanji je ispunio i ja se nadam da će ispuniti i to, odnosno da će doći do normalizacije odnosa između Srbije i Sjedinjenih Američkih Država. Hvala.
Thank you. There were a lot of subjects put together, and I saw more like a political speech than a question, but I'll try to take each one of them in order. I would first say that my advice is don't believe everything you read in Informer or hear on TV Pink. Secondly, with regard to Kosovo, it's clearly the one issue which dominates disagreement between our two countries. Our perception of what took place in the 1990s, in particular in 1999, and the perception that you just elaborated are like 100% opposites. The United States perception of what happened in 1999 was that the Slobodan Milosevic regime engaged in an organized campaign of ethnic cleansing of its own territory to eliminate Albanian minority in all of Serbia, but what was in fact a majority in Kosovo. It included resolutions by the United Nations on multiple occasions, United Nations Security Council, condemning Serbia for excessive use of force against civilian populations, for efforts to ethnically cleanse populations and force people to flee their country. Actions by both what at the time was the Yugoslav National Army, but also by the Serbian police. Those condemnations and calls for a change in policy were not heeded by Slobodan Milosevic. After repeated calls in the United Nations Security Council, supported by all the members of the United Nations Security Council, and led eventually to a decision by NATO to put a stop to Serbian aggression against the Albanian population of Kosovo. That's our impression of what took place. The bombing of Serbia was aimed at knocking out the Serbian military and police from Kosovo so that they would stop the ethnic cleansing that they were engaged in and for which they had been accused by the entire international community. That's our perception of what happened. We were in conflict. War is not a pleasant thing, and I can understand the bitterness that many people here in Serbia feel. I have said on many occasions, and I will say again today, that every civilian casualty which took place in that conflict is a human tragedy. And that would include any civilian casualty caused by the bombing by NATO, but it would also include the thousands of civilian casualties in Kosovo, both on the Serbian side and on the Albanian side, and there were far more on the Albanian side than on the Serbian side, caused by the ethnic conflict that was raging inside Kosovo at the time. So when I talked about our support for this internal dialogue, one of the key things I think that most struck me by President Vucic's call for this internal dialogue was to do away with some of the myths that are prevailing here in this country about what Kosovo is, what Kosovo was, and how we got to where we are. As far as Kosovo is concerned, you're from there, so you would know better. 92% of the population of that country are not Serbian. They are Albanian. And they do not want to be a part of Serbia. They have expressed that very clearly. The United Nations, after the 1999 campaign ended, with Resolution 1244, called for a process of political negotiations to resolve the status of Kosovo. For years, a special envoy of the United Nations worked on exactly that process. Marty Ahtisaari, a man who wasn't just anybody, he was already a Nobel Prize winner for his work on resolving an ethnic conflict in Indonesia. He worked tirelessly, presented proposal after proposal after proposal, and in the end, it was the Serbian side which rejected every proposal. The Albanian side accepted the proposals, and when Serbia refused to agree, the United Nations had to close down that mission, and Kosovo declared its independence. And that Declaration of Independence has been supported by over 100 countries in the world. So I understand the emotion with which the Serbian population has about this, and the history revolving around Kosovo as the cradle of Serbian civilization. But the reality is that Kosovo today, and in fact Kosovo 20 years ago, and Kosovo 60 years ago, has long since not been a Serbian-dominated territory. It's been a Serbian-controlled territory. And the Albanian population decided that they were not happy with the rule that they were getting from Belgrade. They rose up and they have declared their independence, and the vast majority of the countries of the world have accepted that Declaration of Independence. So that's how we see the situation as it is now. You mentioned hundreds of tons or whatever it was of uranium. How many of you here think that the United States dropped depleted uranium on Serbia?
15 tons.
15 tons, whatever. How many of you here think that? Well, you'd be right if you thought that there were depleted uranium weapons used. They weren't bombs. They were, in fact, the bullets, which are the rather large caliber bullets, which are shot out of an A-10 tank killer. That's the only major weaponry in the United States which uses depleted uranium. Depleted uranium is used in the military forces of many countries in the world, and it's used because of its capabilities to pierce armor. It is used to shoot at tanks, and it is used to shoot at reinforced bunkers, and nothing more. 98% of all the depleted uranium that was used in the 1990 bombing campaign was used inside Kosovo. A slightly smaller part was used in the Preševo rally against Serbian armored convoys. None of it was used north of that. And in fact, doctors who have looked at this issue, studies by people such as the United Nations Environmental Program, the World Health Organization, have all concluded that depleted uranium, there's no causal effect between the use of depleted uranium weaponry and a rise in cancer unless you went and crawled into the carcass of a tank that had been hit by one of those weapons. So within 150 meters beyond any strike where there is depleted uranium, there is no noticeable effect of that sort of weaponry. So I understand people concerned about this. I see it, I read about it, I know there's a suit that's ongoing, that's being pursued in many of the countries which use this weaponry, but our own Department of Veterans Affairs, which looks after the safety and health of our veterans, has concluded that there is no evidence which would indicate that the use of depleted uranium bullets leads to a rise in cancer among those who are either used it or who have been in the vicinity of where it has been used. You mentioned the Batici brothers. This is a case which, frankly, is raised by everybody who asks me questions about problems in our relationship, and it is a problem in our relationship. But frankly, it should be a problem for you all. Here's what happened. 3 guys, Albanians, from Kosovo, and yes, they were fighters in the Kosovo Liberation Army.
That is true.
That's your point of view. They would call themselves the Liberation Army.
Yeah,
no, we called it terrorist attacks. And at one time we did label the Kosovo Armed Forces, excuse me, the Kosovo Liberation Army as a terrorist organization. But at a certain point, they became a legitimate force fighting for the liberation of their nation. In any case, they were fighters. Nobody questions that. There was an agreement that the fighting stopped. And after that fighting stopped, they crossed illegally into Serbian territory. That is, they left Kosovo, and they came across the demarcation line into Serbian territory. And they were arrested. They were arrested for illegally entering Serbia. They were not arrested for carrying out terrorist attacks. They were not arrested for planning a military operation. They were actually helping a Roma neighbor move, but they were arrested, and they probably deserved to be arrested. They were then released from the prison they were held in, handed over to a special unit of the Serbian police, taken to another place in Serbia, and disappeared. And years later, their bodies were found out back of that special police unit with their hands tied behind their backs and bullet holes in the back of their heads. And I'm sure that you're not saying that even if you catch a terrorist, that is Serbian justice. A bullet hole in the back of the head during a time of peace inside Serbian territory. They should have been prosecuted if they committed a crime and held accountable in the jail. And yes, it upsets us because they're 3 American citizens. But it should upset everyone in Serbia just as much. Because it's the same sort of rationale which led you in Serbia to find trucks loaded with bodies sunk in the Danube, to find mass graves in Raška and elsewhere. And those facts can't be ignored either. With time, as part of this myth building, I think Serbs have begun to lose track of some of those elements as well. So the Batici brothers, I'm not saying that they were angels, but I am saying that they were murdered. They were murdered by your police. And anybody who can say that 3 people showed up at a police station and were found out back with bullets in the back of their heads, and that nobody knows what happened, you know they're covering up. And should we be satisfied? No. But frankly, none of you should be satisfied either. At least that's my perspective. Now, you talked about the missing people in Kosovo or from the wars. We are all in favor of doing everything possible to uncover and to locate all of those people so their families can have closure. And that is good for Serbians, and that is good for Kosovars, and that is good for Bosniaks, and that is good for Croats. Because there are, in fact, thousands and thousands of people of all ethnic nationalities who are still missing. But those who are experts in this issue, who have followed it, the Red Cross, the International Red Cross, will also tell you that there are many more Kosovars who are missing, that is Kosovo Albanians, than there are Kosovo Serbs. So I'm not putting a relativism. All of these issues should be uncovered. If they were killed illegally, those people who committed the crime should be brought to justice. But they should all do it, and I hope you aren't implying that you think that the United States is somehow trying to cover up this issue, because we are not. We have been in the forefront of pushing and supporting efforts to locate each and every one of those bodies, to investigate the circumstances, and to find those who are guilty and have them brought to justice. So that's how we do it. We provide a lot of support through NGOs who are not friendly to Serbia. You know, we do provide support through NGOs. We also provide support directly to the Serbian government. I just came from an event earlier today which wrapped up a program working with the Judicial Academy here in Serbia, wholly and completely funded through the Serbian government. As a matter of fact, I would say that a large share, if not even the majority, of our assistance programs are funded directly with and through the Serbian government. But yes, we do work with non-governmental organizations. But because we do, I've talked to many of these people, and I can tell you that almost every one of them would bridle, that is, who would be very upset to be described as an enemy of Serbia or unfriendly to Serbia. In fact, most of the people who are the active participants in these civil society organizations are Serbs too, and they are patriotic Serbs, and they think that what they're doing is for the good of their country, and they think that the sort of reforms, political and economic, that they help to advocate are for the good of Serbia and for the good of their nation. And if they were here in the room, I'm sure that you would hear a similar response from them. You're surrounded by criminalized countries. Rule of law is a problem throughout this region, but to be very honest, I don't think that anybody would say that Serbia is a shining light on the hill in this regard either. The influence of criminal groups in all of these countries is strong. The importance of creating rule of law and an effective judicial and police security branch to enforce it is a key problem for all of the countries in the region. And I will say that our programs in this region are equal and all aimed at the same thing. And I wouldn't be one to be pointing fingers in one direction or the other, because I think there's a lot of blame to go around everywhere in this region. Catalonia, Crimea, Kosovo. I think that's a very, very important issue, so let me deal with it. I see all three of those cases as different and unique in their own way. So let me take them in order. In the case of Kosovo, and its independence, we have, as I said before, a country which, or a territory, which was part of the violent breakup of the former Yugoslavia, that was the subject of multiple resolutions of the United Nations Security Council over a course of years. It was the subject of a UN-led political negotiation on status, which also lasted for a number of years, and which collapsed on every occasion, whether it was in Rambouillet before the bombing began, or when Marti Ahtisaari folded up shop and closed up his operation, because Serbia refused to accept the compromise proposals that were being put forward, because Slobodan Milosevic refused to accept the compromise proposals that were being put forward, and as a result, eventually led to Kosovo declaring its independence. And when is a country legitimate when it declares its independence, and when is it not? I think it's by the weight of other countries in the world accepting that independence. And in the case of Kosovo, we see that over 100 countries in the world, including most of your biggest economic partners, and most of the countries in the region that your country says it strategically wants to join, have all recognized the legitimacy of Kosovo's claim for independence. In the case of Crimea, I don't recall a single action in the United Nations about Crimea until after Russia had invaded it with its troops and rigged an independence vote, which was not accepted by anyone in the world. And that all happened in a matter of weeks. It was little green men, if you remember, Russian special forces who came into Crimea. They divided a portion of a neighbor's country, which they wanted to keep, and then they moved forward. It's probably true that the population of Crimea is very pro-Russian inclined. And they probably could have won a vote if, in fact, there had been considered by the international community a legitimacy to raising this issue, if there had been a UN-led process leading to the question of what is the future status of Crimea. But none of that happened. In fact, this was a power grab And I would say that Russia is the only country in Europe since the fall of the Berlin Wall which has invaded and occupied a neighboring country. It did it in South Ossetia. It's done it in Abkhazia, taking 2 chunks of Georgian territory. It remains with its troops in eastern Moldova, and it has also taken over portions of Ukraine, and also funded the separatists in the rest of eastern Ukraine. So I consider those 2 circumstances incredibly, entirely, and totally different. Catalonia, same thing. Where's the UN Security Council resolution raising concern about the rights of the Catalonians? Where is the process of negotiation led by the international community? Where was a conflict, for that matter? This is a constitutional crisis within Spain. And it's a constitutional crisis which, as you've seen, no one else in the world wants to get involved in, because we think it can be resolved peacefully, and so far it has been resolved peacefully. So, you know, we often say these are apples and oranges, but I really cannot see any relationship between the history which led to the independence of Kosovo and what happened in Crimea or what is happening today in Catalonia. Thank you.
Imamo vremena, ja mislim, za još jedno kratko pitanje.
Moje ime je Milica Ćurčić i student sam doktorskih studija Fakulteta bezbednosti. Vaša ekscelencijo, hvala vam na gostovanju na našem fakultetu i ovom sveobuhvatnom predavanju. Moje pitanje odnosi se na navode koje nalazimo u radovima brojnih teoretičara iz sfere studija bezbednosti i vojnih nauka, gde se navodi da su zapadne države i Sjedinjene Američke Države, i Sjedinjene Američke Države odgovorne za politizaciju pojma hibridni rat nakon 2014. godine. Možete to da iskomentarišete? Hvala.
I haven't seen those commentaries, and I'm not sure I understand it, but we are responsible for politicization of the idea of hybrid warfare. I guess I'd have to ask you to elaborate, because I'm not sure what that means. I mean, we are concerned about hybrid warfare. Is hybrid warfare something new? No. I mean, you know, psychological operations have existed throughout time. The efforts to affect the media campaign and what the impact it has have existed throughout time. The social media efforts right now are something new. What I would say is that what we're seeing, particularly in the case of Russia, is simply a perfection of the effort. They are doing quite well on hybrid warfare. Their ability to incorporate and integrate all different elements into a strategy is, I think, probably one of the most important security innovations of the last decade. And in particular, their ability to use social media to not only present their case, but also to hide who's doing it, and to seek to suborn and draw out the weaknesses of their opponents. And I can use a great example from my own country. You know, there's a big controversy in the United States as to whether Russia interfered in our last elections. And there's a growing body of evidence that they created a large number of fictitious people and fictitious sites, all aimed at engaging in political issues in the United States. And it's not that they were engaging in political issues that Russia really cared about, or even that reflected Russia's view. Because they created a site that supports Texas's independence from the United States, run out of Moscow. And they created a site which supports gun ownership and security, normally a Republican rightist issue. And they created a site which encouraged people to go out on the streets and protest about the way that African Americans are treated by the police in the United States, very much a leftist position. All of these efforts were aimed at driving wedges within somebody else's society to weaken their own cohesion and weaken their own democracy. And in some ways you have to admire it for their ability to move forward with this. At the same time, I think that there's a lesson for all of us that we need to beware and wary of these sorts of operations. And the ability of countries to, in a more sophisticated manner, use all elements at their disposal to try to weaken an opponent. And that's the other thing that I would say that I think is so important about the Russian effort. Yes, hybrid warfare has always existed, but it normally exists in a time of war. This is not a time of war. The United States and Russia are not at war. And yet they are doing everything possible to undermine the stability of my country. That's a matter of concern. That's an unfriendly act, as far as I'm concerned. And I think it's something that should be looked at here. There's no question that Russia is engaged in similar activities here in this region, supporting certain sides and trying to damage other sides through social media outlets, through the use of bots, through the use of non-governmental organizations. Montenegro is the clearest example of that, but there are other examples in this region. And even the question that I got about the criminal regime in Macedonia would make one wonder where that information came from, because most people saw what happened in Macedonia in the last 6 months as in fact a victory of democracy. The person who won the majority of votes in Macedonia eventually became the Prime Minister of Macedonia over the efforts by the ancient regime to hold on to power through whatever means possible. But you see a lot of those sorts of efforts through social media to try to paint a different picture also in Macedonia. Thank you very much for both that last question, but also for your attention and for your interest in this issue, because it truly is, I think, vital for the future of your security, but also of our security. Thank you.
Vaša ekscelencijo, za sećanje
Dobio sam domać lista.
Pogled na engleskom i na srpskom. Jedan mali suvenir. Peta. Hvala vam.
Would you go to the office or not? Yeah.